You know, Psalm 40, verse 2 says that God lifted me out of the miry clay. He lifted me out of the pit. And He set my feet on a rock. He gave me a firm place to stand. You know, that's true for each one of us. But it's especially true and vivid for today's guest, Javier Mondragon. Javier grew up in the streets of Mexico and got caught up in a world of theft and drugs and alcohol and gang violence. But God had a plan for Javier. And I invite you to just sit back and enjoy and take in this amazing story of restoration. Javier, you are pastor of Many Nations Church. You co-pastor with your wife.
Yes.
And you are founder of Bridge of Grace Ministries. Mm-hmm. And I want to learn about all of that. But your pathway there is one of the most mind-boggling things I have ever heard in my life. And I'd like to start out in Mexico. You grew up south of Mexico City?
Yes.
And what was life like for you?
Well, very challenging for sure. I'm from a city called Cuernavaca. And so, yes, that's south of Mexico City. And just grew up, in a very challenging area, very poor. I'm the youngest of 6. And my father left my mother actually after I was born. I was only 1 year old when he left home. And so yes, growing up, it was very challenging. My mom had to have to work 2 or 3 jobs, so barely see her at home. Remember going to school, learn, when you are living that way, you learn to take care of yourself or depend on other people, your friends, to watch out for you. And so yes, that's how I grew up.
Your father had been an alcoholic?
Correct. Yeah.
And you're the youngest?
Yes.
Right. So your older siblings probably felt the brunt of that more, and then you feel it in the ultimate of abandonment, I guess, by your father.
And that's a very interesting thing because my brother's experience, or even my sister's experience, when he left, a different way of how I experience it. I have a sister who she's 10 years older than me, and so she remembers. She remembers that day when he pulled out his all his stuff and put it in packed, and he was going. He was leaving. I don't remember that. So she has a different. The way she suffered, the way she experienced when he left home, it's very different than how I did.
Yeah.
So growing up, I see him one way, but she will always had that in her mind.
So I think you grew up in the second most violent neighborhood of the city, and there's gangs and shootings. Mm-hmm. And how old were you when your brother became a leader of a gang?
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, I think I was like 4 or 5 when he was the leader already of the gang. People fear him. A lot of the people in the neighborhood, a lot of the even the gangs around us. The gangs were by territory, so it depends on what neighborhood you were from. You were not allowed to go to the next neighborhood by yourself, and if you go by yourself, then there's consequences of that. So yeah, I grew up and he was the leader of the gang, and he was also in the system, going to jail, in and out, and all the time. And so, but even when he was in jail, he was always, kind of leading the neighborhood gang, even from the jail.
He would even lead it from the cell.
Yes.
So at 12, is that when your brother starts to solicit you to do some errands?
Yes. So I was 12 when some of the other people that were working with him started to kind of just embrace me, took me in. And yeah, I was delivering packages. I didn't even know what they were at the beginning. And they would just tell me, here's a package, you can take it here, and I would take it. And the reason is, of course, for children or, at that age, police wouldn't suspect or or anything. So I remember delivering things here and there until later, like, I don't know, it was like a month later, maybe I found out what I was doing.
And then to just continue because you were being embraced by the gang?
Right. Yeah. Then it just it's kind of that environment. It's kind of like everybody joins. You either join or you're not protected, and so that was the kind of environment. So I started joining too, and doing the crimes that the whole gang was involved.
Did you feel like that gang was providing something for you that was missing? Like in essence, it was like a family?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the whole pressure of a gang. You know, when you are living in those kind of environments. My mom was not at home, you know, and then my father was not at home, of course. And so it kind of, you know, those relationships that you build, I guess that you think that this is your family, they're looking out for you, they take care of you. Like I said, if you don't join, you don't feel secure, you're not protected. And so, which is false, everything is false, but that's what the kind of thing that you understand at the time.
Now you go from just delivering packages to actually stealing yourself, right?
Yes.
How would that work and how did that unfold? What's the first time like and what's it lead to?
I remember very, very well the first time when it was three of us. We broke into a house. That was the first time.
With nobody home?
Nobody home, yeah, but we broke into a house, kind of, you know, one of us just kind of looking into the times when that family will leave home, and so we kind of study like 3 or 4 days to kind of see the pattern on, you know, when they leave home and when nobody was home. And so that was my first time. I think it was, we went in and we broke into the house and we steal and we just left.
And then at what age do you start drinking and using drugs?
Drinking at 12, actually.
Wow.
Yeah, it was 12 when I started drinking and doing marijuana at 12 as well, kind of towards the end, before I turned 13. It was just a thing to do, you know. You're around everybody else, everybody's doing it, and they just invite you to do it, and so you participate, and that's when I started.
Do you feel like you became dependent on them? On alcohol and drugs?
I did, and I think it had to do with my father being an alcoholic. My grandfather was an alcoholic, so, you know, I think it's true that, yeah, what science says now and the doctor says, right, that once you have it in your blood and
you have a propensity.
It's a propensity.
I think you said one of the ways that you would steal is you would grab a woman's necklace and rip it off and just take off running.
Yeah, we just look for a person who will be walking, especially women. And yes, we will run and just grab the necklace, pull it off and run. Or sometimes it's just their handbags, you know, just to look and see, and we would kind of communicate with each other. In places where there were a lot of people at the markets and things like that.
So you can make a quick getaway and not be seen.
Yeah, we did still going to also take parts of cars. You know, it was like other part of the gang that was their specialty.
Was cars.
That's what people will call them and ask them for specific parts that they needed. And so sometimes that's the thing, that was the opportunity, that's what we would do.
Did you go to jail?
I did a few times. Yes. There was one time where I think that was like a marker I was already like 15 years old when I remember going to jail, and I mean, I wake up and I was in jail, and I didn't know, like, I didn't remember what happened. It was because I was doing drugs. Now I wasn't just doing marijuana, I was doing also cocaine. And that day, I think I even inhaled the solvents, like, anything we could do, and so that day it was just a mix of so many things that I took, and I remember waking up in jail. I didn't know how many hours was there. I didn't know if I killed someone. That's the reason I was there. I didn't know. And
what were you charged with then?
Oh, that was a fight. We had a fight, and that was interesting because I wasn't even part of the fight.
Oh.
my friends and I was hanging out with them, and so that was a relief. But at the same time, like I said, what happened? Maybe it was something different.
So you're an alcoholic, you're probably addicted to cocaine. And how does that affect your school, your schooling?
Up until I was 12 and 13, I remember being very competitive. I've always been very competitive, and going to school. I love math, and I was really, really good at math, and always competing with the other students. But you know, when that happens, you start getting involved in those things, and stop going to school or missing school. Yeah, the age of 15, 16, between 15 and 16 is they basically kicked me out of school. I couldn't continue because I just missed so much and didn't turn in my homework or things like that. So yeah, I was kicked out.
So I assume that puts you on the streets even more, more drugs, more alcohol, more stealing.
Yeah, more time now to do anything. And my mom didn't find out that they kicked me out of school until like 2 months later, 3 months later. Like I didn't even tell her. And the things in Mexico are different than here. And so, yeah.
How did you and your brother's activity affect your mom?
Oh, that was a terrible thing. You know, my mom, I mean, I remember seeing her when I was a kid. I remember seeing her, how my brother, you know, not knowing where my brother was, or if he was alive, or something happened to him. Listening and just hearing the sirens going, I remember how she just worried for, you know, is that my son? Is that him? Something happened to him. And so I remember that, and then me growing up and doing the same thing. It was bad. It's a lot of regrets, definitely today.
And she actually became ill?
She did, yeah, she did. And you know, I can say that maybe it was because of all these problems that she had. You know, just her husband leaving her, but now her kids, you know, going through all of this and making her just suffered, and so yeah, she started having a lot of issues. One of the issues is that she had a hernia, and you know, something that is not a big deal, but because she was suffering other things, she went into the hospital, had the surgery, and then after the surgery, she had some complications, and then had an infection, and just they can fix that infection, and she ended up dying at the age of 54.
Oh my goodness. And how old are you at the time?
I was 17 then. I was 17 years old.
So I assume you have a funeral and all, you have the visitation and all that kind of a process, but then you have to decide, I guess, what's next. So do you just go home and think about what's next for me?
Yeah, so everything started, I think, you know, like that was a marker when I wake up in jail and didn't know what happened, you know, did I kill someone or I hurt someone? And then, but after that, there were a lot of times, a lot of moments when I started to feel like I wanted to stop doing what I was doing. I just couldn't, because my friends were there, and there was always this pressure, you know, about, you know, if I stopped drinking for a day or two, you know, they would come and make fun of you, or they would just put pressure into you for you to come back, and it was hard. And you can't leave the gang because I guess you know secrets, you know things, and they don't let you. But it was all this time, and then when she passed, it was again, you know, it was just another reminder. You know, again, a lot of regrets in my life. I felt a lot of times empty, like there was something missing, and just didn't know what it was, but it was missing for sure. I had another brother who grew up in the same environment, but he ended up leaving the environment. He left when he was 18, and he moved to the state of California here in the United States, and he became a Christian. And so he's the one who he came back to the funeral when my mom passed away, and before even before the funeral, he started to send me letters or call me and tell me, you know, you need to get out of that environment. And I didn't listen to him, but when the funeral happened, he came and there was this conversation that we had, and and
And
that
you're
really changed.
you're 17, and he's pleading with you again to leave. Does he invite you to live with him?
He did. Yeah, he did at
And
that
is he
time.
living in Arkansas at the time?
Yes. So he came to California, but then he moved to Arkansas, and he was attending church and everything. And then he asked me if he, if you want to leave this environment, and I told him, well, I kind of want to stop doing what I'm doing. I'm tired. I don't want to do it anymore. And so he invited me to come to Arkansas with him.
So when you went,
I did. Yeah, I moved here. I was 17, almost 18 when I moved.
and where do alcohol and drugs fit in now? Are you done with them, or do you still party and stuff?
No, actually, I came and it was a miracle too. Really, I did. Of course, I had that desire in me. I think it was always there, and it was part of my addiction now, being addictive. So I remember it was really hard when I first moved to not go back and do it. But he kind of told me the rules at home, and he said, just you have to respect home and everything. He never put pressure on me to go to church. I remember that he said, you don't have to go to church. We go to church, but if you want to, that's fine. If you don't want to, but it only took 2 weeks before he took me to this where this miracle happened.
He invited you to a concert, right?
That's correct.
Hey, Javier, you want to go to a concert? And you said, sure.
Yes. He the Billy Graham Crusade at that time. They partnered with a lot of local churches there in that area of where we were living, and they put together this event. But it was in Spanish, so it was for the Hispanic community, Hispanic churches, and it was an outreach, of course. And yeah, they had music. I remember like it was yesterday too. They had a mariachi. It's called Mariachi Los Salmos, which is there's a group from they're still in existence. It's a whole family. They sing mariachi music. They're from Texas, and so I remember that going, and there were a few others. But yeah, there was music at the beginning. But then after that, there was somebody who preached and kind of told his story, and very similar to my story.
His story was similar to what you had lived up to that point at 17.
Yes, yeah, it's the same. He came out of drugs and being part of the gang as well. I think single mother, and he was just telling the story and that redemption and transformation what God did for him, and it's just amazing. God really placed me there and got to relate to the story, and then he did the invitation.
And what did you do?
I remember walking down, kind of what you see on the Billy Graham Crusades where, there's a stadium and people start walking down. He makes the invitation. He did the same. I was almost to the top of that stadium. And I remember my brother was sitting right next to me, and he did the invitation. I tell you the truth. The truth is I didn't know what I was doing. I mean, he talked about his story, and then he said, if you want to invite God to do something for you, what is that? Just come and ask him. And I remember just, kind of was natural for me. I relate to this guy. I want to go and I want to pray, but I didn't know who, if God existed. I kind of was away from church, never attended church or anything. And so I remember getting up and walking down the stairs, going all the way down to the ground, and then he invited us to pray. And
do you remember what you prayed?
Yes, I do. I remember just looking up to heaven and saying, God, I don't have a relationship. I don't know if you exist, but I do want to change. And if you can help me, I'm here. And he did. He did.
You sensed his presence at that moment?
I did. I remember, I don't know what happened, but it was just, I felt this presence. I was crying, and didn't know why. It's just that was the time. I remember him, the preacher said, if there's an emptiness in your heart, there's something in your heart that there's nobody can feel that emptiness, that only God can do it. And it was like that happened exactly. It was just like I had this emptiness, this place in my heart that nobody can fill. And at that moment, I just felt like he came to do that for me. And like I said, I was crying. It was just very real, a very real experience, very miracle.
So I assume you tell your brother?
I did, and he came, and he was crying the same, right?
Oh,
He knew what happened, and he came down, he walked down too, and he just put his arm around me, and you see him crying as well, and just very. I mean, it's amazing for me. I can't imagine what he went through, all the prayers that all these years that he's been praying for me, all the things, and for him to see it happen. Then I came to Christ. It was just probably amazing for him.
so how did your life change?
It turned around completely. From there, I started to ask a lot of questions to my brother, and I said, "Hey, so tell me, what? Tell me about the Bible. Tell me about Jesus." And he started. He said, "Well, do you want to come to church?" I said, "Sure, I'll go." So I went to church, and God puts people. I guess it was so blessed that God put people in my life that was always there. Very helpful. The youth pastor of that church where I was attending with my brother kind of took me under his wing, and he spent a lot of time and invest so much in me, and asking him, I asked him all these questions, and I'm sure I know him. He lives in Indianapolis now.
Oh,
It's
wow.
amazing. And I just saw him a few months ago, but it's amazing the patience he had with me. It was a transformation for sure. I started reading the Bible. I read the Bible, like the whole Bible, in 1 year.
You really did?
In less than a year. And for me, it was, everything was new. I mean,
Because you didn't know about Moses and the 10 Commandments. You knew about
nothing.
Noah and the ark. You knew nothing.
Nothing. I mean, I look at the Noah's Ark, and I heard about it, of course, but I mean, reading it and seeing it, that was just amazing for me. David and Goliath, and stories that people grew up with. I knew about it, but I didn't know exactly what happened, and so for me, it was so interesting, and I just took it in, and a miracle because I didn't need any like rehabilitation for my addictions. It was just God took it all.
You were delivered.
The beginning, I was delivered, and I think it was that experience at that moment when I had taken.
A similar thing happened to me when I surrendered to Christ, what I've been holding back as an adult, and asked him to make my business a ministry. I discovered this insatiable thirst for the Bible, and I did the same thing. I read it from cover to cover, and it's something I've done then every year since, because it just seems new every day because your circumstances are new every day.
Exactly. Yeah. So true.
So a year later, I think you're 18, and you attend an Assemblies of God youth conference in Austin, Texas.
Yes.
Can you describe what happens there?
The same. So now I'm attending church, and Assemblies of God has a very strong ministry with youth, and the church is really, really strong. And so they invited me to this youth conference. Again, it was like 15,000 youth in Austin, Texas. And very, very real experience too. Here you have another evangelist coming in to the front and preaching, and I'm sitting there, and he's preaching, and he's talking about now how God can use your life, and he wants to use you, and you can be an instrument for him to to bless others, and the same, very straightforward for me. It was like, that's me. Yes, God, I want that. I want you to use my life, and the same, he made an invitation, came forward, and I said, God, I'm here. Use me, use my life, and whatever you can do. And so the same, a very real presence, and then from there, I knew God was calling me to do something.
So that's really the day you surrender your life to being used as a minister of God, would you say? And you're going to discover now what that purpose is?
Yeah, I didn't know what it was, but I knew it was something for him that he wanted to do. But
now, I assume you're on fire for God at that time. Are you calling back home and talking to your old friends?
Yes, they thought I was crazy. I told them I discovered a new drug, This really delivers, and this really does really well. And so yes, everybody was thinking, because they know me, they knew me, they knew all the stuff that I did, and they lived with it. They saw it very real, that I was stealing, I was drinking and doing all these drugs. And for me to tell them, my life is different, I just couldn't believe it. Even adults, friends of my mother who saw me, and of course they cared for me, and they always kind of talked to me, disciplined, and And now I told them, they were crying when I told them that my life was different and now I wanted to be some type of minister or pastor or something. And they just couldn't believe it. It's a miracle.
I bet looking back, you're a senior pastor of a church with many nations represented. You have the Bridge of Grace ministry that reaches out into the community. I bet it's interesting for you to look in the rearview mirror and see that kid on the streets addicted to alcohol and drugs, stealing in Mexico, and where you are today. And that can just be nothing but God.
Yeah, it has to be. It has to be. I mean, so many times where I can go back and think of specific times when my life was in danger. I had a gun on my head, with a threat, and when I was running because they were coming behind me, and we were just running because we were in the wrong neighborhood. And I remember those things, and it had to be God. God had to be protecting me. Angels were around me probably, because if it wasn't from Him, I would be dead. Yeah, like a lot of my friends. A lot of my friends who are today are dead or they're in jail, and they're not here to see it. So.
Javier, we haven't even gotten to the love story, to God's miraculous work through seminary and how He ends up bringing you to Fort Wayne. We'll have to do another show for that. But it's highly likely that somebody's watching and they're far from God. They may not be quite where you were, but they are far from Him. And just like you did, they need Him. What would you say to them?
I will tell you that I think the biggest lesson that I have learned in my life is that, I have a lot of regrets of my past. Of course, my mom knows seeing me the way I am, the person who I am today. I wish she was here. I did so many bad things, that I thought it's amazing, and I don't think God can forgive those things. And maybe you feel that way because you feel so far from God, and you have done some things that you think God cannot forgive this. I want to tell you, He can forgive it because He's done it with me. He can redeem those things that you did in your life. He can use them for good. The Bible says that He works it all for good for those who love Him. And so I just want to encourage you to let Him redeem those things in your life, and let Him do a transformation, and He can do it.
Amen. Javier, thank you so much. You're a blessing to so many,
Oh, thank you,
including
Mitch.
me.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.